Silence is not empty. It is a voice waiting to be heard. And when you leave a woman in that silence, she does not wither, she awakens. When you stop talking to a woman, the silence you leave behind is not empty. It becomes a space she learns to breathe in. At first, she may feel that absence like a bruise, tender, aching, uncertain. She will wonder what she said or didn't say, what you heard or didn't want to hear. She will pace the walls of your absence like a room with no doors, searching for a reason, a mistake, something she can fix. But the truth will settle slowly, heavy, real, and undeniable. You stop talking not because she failed, but because you chose silence. And that choice, whether out of fear, fatigue, or indifference, becomes the first brick in her rebuilding. The pause, though painful, is power. You see, when a woman is forced to sit alone with herself, she begins to remember the rhythm of her own name. She starts to hear the echo of a voice that was buried beneath compromise, beneath care, beneath all the times she said yes when her soul whispered no. She remembers who she was before she folded parts of herself to fit into a space you no longer occupy. She reclaims her power not in a loud explosion, but in small, sacred acts. She waters the plant she forgot about. She takes herself out to dinner, sits at a table for one, and watches the world move around her, unapologetic, unhurried. She picks up her journal and writes not about you, but about her dreams, her anger, her resilience. She finds the words you never gave her and learns she never needed them. She doesn't curse your name. She doesn't tear herself apart trying to read between the lines of your silence. Instead, she reads herself, the lines on her palms, the curve of her spine, the beauty in her reflection that doesn't ask for approval anymore. There's a kind of sacred fire that rises in a woman when she realizes she was the answer all along, that she didn't need to be rescued, only reminded. And oh, how silence is a harsh but honest reminder. It tells her no one is coming to save you, but then it whispers something else. You don't need saving, you need unleashing. She starts speaking in rooms she once stayed silent in. She stops waiting for a message that never comes and starts writing her own. She blocks, deletes, lets go, not out of bitterness, but because bitterness no longer belongs in her mouth. She needs her voice for bigger things, for healing, for poetry, for building something beautiful out of what was left behind. This is not a woman scorned. This is a woman awakened. You thought you were leaving her alone, but you were only giving her space. Space to breathe, to stretch, to remember. You thought silence would punish her, but it freed her because she is not made of need. She is made of earth and storm and spine. She is rooted, and roots know what to do in the dark. She doesn't need your words to feel seen. She sees herself now. She doesn't crave your attention. She commands her own. She is not waiting by the phone. She is building altars, writing songs, running businesses, raising herself in the image of every strong woman before her. Reclaiming her power doesn't mean she forgets. It means she redefines. She redefines what love means, what strength looks like, what she deserves. And once she's seen herself clearly, there's no turning back. You may cross her path again, and if you do, she will not flinch, she will not tremble, she will smile perhaps, but it will be the smile of someone who survived, not someone who's still waiting. She reclaims her power in your absence, not because you gave it to her, but because you could never take it away. You just reminded her where to find it. When the voices that once surrounded her fall silent, a woman finds herself holding the pen. Not metaphorically at first, but literally. She might pick up a pen just to feel the weight of it in her fingers. The quiet forces her to sit with blank pages, blank hours, and the daunting truth that no one else is coming to finish the story she thought you were writing together. And in that stillness, Something ancient stirs within her, the storyteller. At first, she may write questions, scribbled sentences that carry the ache of confusion. Why? What changed? Did I matter? But eventually, those questions become declarations, not about you, but about her, because she begins to realize that for too long her story was co-authored, that entire chapters bore your voice louder than hers, even when she was the one who bled on the pages. So now, she starts to write her own name in bold. She revisits the beginning, not to relive the pain, but to reclaim it. She writes not to remember you, but to remember herself. The way she used to laugh before doubt crept in, the dreams she silenced to support yours, the days she molded herself into shapes that were easier for others to hold. And the beauty in this rediscovery is that her narrative becomes nonlinear. It dances, sways, pauses, leaps. She lets herself be complicated again, joyful and grieving, soft and steel-spined. She gives herself permission to contradict the expectations others wrote into her margins. One day, she's writing a fierce battle cry. The next, a gentle lullaby to the parts of her heart still mending. Both are true. Both are hers. With every word, she learns that she does not owe her story to anyone, not in apology, not in defense, not in explanation. She no longer writes to be understood. She writes to understand herself, and in that act alone, she heals. She writes through her fear, her fury, her freedom. The silence that was once your absence becomes the ink of her transformation. Her words stretch beyond the pain. They become prayers, poems, manifestos. She writes on receipts, napkins, mirrors. She posts captions with teeth. She sends herself texts at 2 a.m. that say, "You are more than enough," and signs them with her own name. This is not just writing, this is reclamation. The story she tells now is not the one where she was left. It's the one where she rose, where she realized that the plot twist wasn't your departure, but her return to herself. She starts to define her own happy ending, and surprise, it doesn't require your return or your regret. Her story doesn't hinge on being chosen. It hinges on choosing herself. She rewrites her beliefs that love is not endurance, that silence isn't strength, that sacrificing herself for connection isn't romance, it's erasure. And as she rewrites these beliefs, her world reshapes itself. New friendships bloom, old fears fade. She begins to attract people who see her as she sees herself, whole, powerful, in progress. She becomes the author of her becoming, and what a fierce author she is. She doesn't skip the hard chapters. She includes the breakdowns, the unanswered texts, the sleepless nights, but she tells them honestly. And then she writes what came after. The morning she looked in the mirror and didn't feel lost. The walk she took alone and felt safe. The moment she laughed out loud in public and didn't look around to see who noticed. She begins to live in a way that inspires others to pick up their pens. Her story radiates courage, not because it's tidy, but because it's real. And in telling it, she changes its ending, not to erase what happened, but to choose what happens next. She writes in a voice that's entirely hers now, one that doesn't tremble, doesn't shrink, doesn't ask permission. She's not waiting for someone to validate her version of events. She knows her truth. She's lived it. She's living it still. And when the next chapter begins, it won't start with someone entering her life. It will begin with her walking forward, her head high, her pen steady, her voice clear. She no longer needs someone else to tell her story. She's writing it herself, and it's a masterpiece. When the world grows quiet and the voice she once reached for is no longer there, a woman turns inward, not because she wants to, but because she must. There is no longer a hand to hold, a text to reply to, a conversation to rehearse. All that remains is herself. The stillness presses in like fog around her ribs, and for a time she simply breathes through it. This is the moment that many fear, the turning inward, the confrontation with one's own reflection, unguarded, unfiltered, and stripped of distraction. At first, what she finds may be hard to face: doubt, shame, a swirl of unanswered questions and stories she's carried too long. She listens to the voices in her head that were always there but drowned out by external noise. Voices that say she wasn't enough, that she stayed too long, gave too much, expected too little. She doesn't run from these voices now. She sits with them. She lets the discomfort settle like dust on a long-forgotten shelf. And then slowly she begins to dust it off. She picks up pieces of herself that she once set aside to make someone else comfortable. Memories, dreams, beliefs, even boundaries. She holds them up to the light. Some still fit, some never did. She discards what no longer serves her, not in anger, but with a quiet reverence, like shedding a skin that was once hers but is no longer needed. This turning inward is not selfish. It is sacred. It is survival. It is the first real taste of solitude, and though it stings at first, it begins to sweeten. She finds calm in the cadence of her own breath. Her mornings are slower, her nights are deeper. The silence that once echoed with absence becomes a mirror, and she begins to see herself clearly, not as someone defined by others, but as a whole being, shaped by her own choices, her own light, her own pain. She notices the way she's always poured herself into others, like water into empty cups, never pausing to ask, "Who fills me?" Now, she asks, and she answers. She fills herself with time, with art, with nature, with movement, with prayer, with laughter, with tears. She learns to hold space for herself. She becomes both the question and the answer. This inner work is invisible to the world. There are no posts about it, no applause. But every day she shows up for herself is a quiet revolution. Every boundary she sets, every no she speaks without guilt, every moment she listens to her intuition instead of chasing validation. These are the roots she's growing, deep and unseen. And then slowly she begins to turn outward, not because she needs to be seen, but because she now sees herself. She no longer seeks relationships to complete her. She brings her fullness into the world, not asking who will love her, but asking how she can live more truthfully. The outward shift is subtle but powerful. She walks differently, not with arrogance, but with alignment. Her posture says, "I know who I am." She shows up to rooms as herself, not a curated version designed to please or impress. She speaks from a place of knowing, not needing. Her presence becomes presence, whole, intentional, grounded. She reconnects with friends, with work, with passions, not from a place of longing, but of joy. She realizes that life is not something to be filled, but something to be felt. She smiles not to prove she's okay, but because she is. And when she laughs, it is a full sound, not one stolen or stifled by someone else's silence. She starts pouring into others again, but differently now. No longer from depletion, but from overflow. She has become her own well. She gives love without losing herself. She offers grace without erasing her boundaries. Her connections deepen because they are rooted in honesty, not performance. And if she meets someone new, someone who speaks, listens, stays, it's not to fill a void, it's to add to a life already whole. The woman who once crumbled in the quiet now thrives in it. The woman who turned inward to find her brokenness emerged with wisdom, and as she steps into the world again, she does so not to be chosen, but to choose, not to be rescued, but to rise. She turned inward not to retreat, but to remember. She turns outward now, not to seek, but to shine. She learns, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through a slow, aching silence, that love does not always speak. It doesn't always come dressed in declarations, wrapped in perfect words or timely reassurances. Sometimes love is quiet, And sometimes love disappears without a single sound. She learns this not from books, not from stories told by others, but from living it, feeling the air shift when the voice she once depended on simply falls away. At first, she waits. She waits for a message, a call, a sign, anything to confirm that the bond they once shared still lingers somewhere out in the ether. But it doesn't come. The silence stretches like a shadow at dusk, long and consuming. She listens for something, an explanation, an apology, a reason, but all she hears is her own breathing in the absence. That's when the lesson begins. She learns that the people who once held her close can walk away without saying goodbye, that promises can live in someone's mouth for a season, but not always in their actions. She learns that even the most beautiful "I love you" can unravel when silence takes its place, and that love, even when real, isn't always enough to keep someone present. But she also begins to learn something deeper, something gentler and harder all at once. She learns that the absence of words doesn't always mean the absence of feeling, that some people are not equipped to speak love in the ways she needs to hear it, and that their silence may come from fear, from confusion, from wounds they never learned to heal. This does not excuse the silence, but it gives her perspective. It allows her to stop translating her worth based on someone else's inability to show up. She no longer defines love as the loudest voice in the room. She no longer waits for grand gestures or perfectly timed texts to confirm her value. Instead, she starts observing. She watches how people treat her in the in-between moments, when life is not exciting, when no one is looking, when they have nothing to gain. She learns that true love does not always speak, but it shows. It shows in consistency, in presence, in showing up even when the words are hard to find. And just as she sees what love is not, she also begins to understand what love truly is. She sees it in her own reflection, in the way she keeps choosing herself day after day. She sees it in her ability to hold space for herself when no one else does. She recognizes love in the smallest acts, in the way she makes her morning coffee, in the way she softens her own sharp edges, in how she speaks kindly to herself when the world forgets to. Love doesn't always need to shout. It can be soft. It can be still. It can be the strength to let someone go when they cannot meet you where you are. It can be the quiet courage to forgive someone who never asked. And perhaps most powerfully, it can be the silence that teaches her to listen to herself, to her body, to her intuition. She begins to understand that some of the deepest lessons of love are learned not in its presence, but in its absence. That being alone doesn't mean being unloved. That silence does not always signal rejection. It can sometimes be a redirection, guiding her back to herself. The woman she's becoming doesn't just want love that sounds good. She wants love that feels safe, that feels whole, that stays. She no longer romanticizes love that vanishes. She no longer calls silence mysterious when it's actually neglect. She doesn't chase what doesn't echo her. She listens, truly listens to what is unsaid, and she believes it. There is a quiet kind of strength in this knowing, in no longer needing love to be loud in order to feel it, in realizing that love that harms, love that hides, love that disappears without care is not love at all. It's a lesson, and she's learned it. Now she loves differently. She listens differently. She speaks only when it's true, and she stays only when it's safe. She doesn't beg for words that should come freely. She doesn't cling to ghosts. She honors the silence because it taught her everything the noise never could. She builds without applause, not because she doesn't deserve the cheers, the praise, the recognition, but because she has learned not to wait for it, not anymore. The world may not see her efforts, may not witness her early mornings or her quiet nights, her tired hands or her relentless will, but she keeps going. She builds anyway. At first, she used to look around after each effort, each decision, each brave step forward. She waited for someone to notice, to say, "You're doing great," to say, "I see you." She needed that once, not out of vanity, but out of a hunger to be seen, to be affirmed, to be reminded that her effort mattered. But the silence that met her taught her something more enduring than applause ever could. She began to realize that the world claps loudest for performances, not progress, for results, not resilience, for endings, not the messy, unseen beginnings. And she was not performing. She was becoming, quietly, steadily, through every setback, every doubt, every lonely day, when she questioned whether any of it would matter. But it did. It does. She builds not to impress, but to express, not to be adored, but to be aligned with her purpose, with her truth, with the woman she knows she is meant to become. She has let go of the need to be watched, to be validated. What matters now is the work itself, the inner work, the outer work, the work of healing, the work of creating, the work of rebuilding a life from broken bricks and scarred hands. And it is not glamorous what she does. It is not celebrated. There are no crowds for a woman who gets out of bed after grief, who goes to therapy, who pays her bills, who leaves the relationship that dimmed her light, who returns to school after years of doubt, who starts over when no one believes in her dream. But this is the sacred work, the work that shapes her, the work that builds the foundation for something unshakable. She learns to clap for herself, not out of pride, but out of reverence, because she knows what it costs to keep showing up. She knows what she's had to overcome, the nights she cried silently while still waking up at dawn to try again, the moments she chose growth over comfort, integrity over attention, discipline over distraction. She does not need a stage to validate her strength. Her life is the proof. There are people who may never understand her journey. They may see only the outcome, if they see it at all. They may think she got lucky, that things simply fell into place. But she knows the truth. She knows every piece she picked up alone, every time she had to encourage herself, every time she built something beautiful out of nothing but faith. She has made peace with the quiet. It no longer scares her. It fortifies her. In the silence, she finds focus. In the solitude, she finds clarity. She is no longer pulled in every direction by the need to be liked, seen, or applauded. She moves with intention, not for attention. And yes, there are still days when it would be nice to hear "you're doing well." Days when the weight feels heavy, when the climb feels endless. But she doesn't stop, because she's not building for a moment. She's building for a legacy, for a life that feels like home when she lives in it, for a voice that rings true when she speaks, for a self that stands tall even when no one else is watching. She understands now that the most powerful things in life are often grown in private. Roots do their work underground. Foundations are poured before anyone sees the house. Healing happens behind closed doors, and so does becoming. Quiet, steady, true. She builds without applause because she knows that applause is fleeting. But character, purpose, self-respect, those last. And that is what she is shaping, something lasting, something real. She no longer asks, will they notice? She only asks, is this true to me? And with that question as her compass, she keeps building, stone by stone, day by day, until one day she looks around and realizes she has built a life worthy of the quiet. She comes back, different, not louder, not flashier, but rooted, calm, certain in a way that startles even those who thought they knew her best. Something in her has shifted. You can see it in the way she moves, deliberate, present, no longer chasing after people, explanations, or lost time. She doesn't need to prove anything anymore. She just is. And that is more powerful than anything she's ever said. When she left, whether by choice or by circumstance, she was carrying the weight of questions, the ache of not being understood, the exhaustion of giving too much to places that only took. She left not to disappear, but to find something, to remember who she was before the world taught her to shrink, before love taught her to forget herself. She left with her heart in pieces, but with a quiet determination to gather each one and hold it tenderly. She did not return overnight. There were no quick fixes or easy affirmations. The path was long, and it asked much of her. It asked her to sit with discomfort, to look at her reflection and face the parts she had long ignored. It asked her to forgive herself for staying too long, for hoping too hard, for trusting people who couldn't carry her heart. And so she did the work, slowly, honestly, without shortcuts. And in that space, unseen, uncelebrated, she changed. She learned to enjoy her own company, not as a backup plan, but as a gift. She found joy in the quiet, strength in the solitude. She stopped searching for someone to fill her emptiness and instead learned to fill it with herself, her passions, her voice, her healing. The silence that once made her feel abandoned became her sanctuary. When she comes back, she no longer bends to fit in. She no longer lowers her standards for the sake of being loved. She no longer explains herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She comes back with boundaries like breath, natural, necessary, and non-negotiable. She doesn't fight for space anymore. She takes it. She doesn't wait for permission. She moves forward. Those who knew the version of her, who overextended, over-apologized, and overcompensated might be confused. They might say she's changed. They're right. She has. She's no longer available for what drains her. She no longer plays roles that cost her peace. She no longer settles for anything less than mutual respect and real connection. And no, she's not cold, she's not bitter, she's not angry, she's just awake. Her eyes are open now, open to her worth, open to the lessons, open to the kind of life she wants and the kind she'll never accept again. Her heart is softer, but her standards are higher. She still believes in love, in friendship, in possibility, but now she believes in herself more. She carries herself differently, not with arrogance, but with clarity. There's a stillness to her presence, a quiet knowing that she doesn't need to chase what's meant for her. She doesn't rush, she doesn't force. She trusts the timing of her life, and in that trust, she finds her power. She's not coming back to be who she was. That version of her served its purpose. That version loved deeply, gave fully, learned painfully. But she outgrew her, and now she's stepping into the version she was always meant to be, the one who no longer doubts her voice, the one who no longer needs to be chosen to feel worthy, the one who walks into rooms without shrinking, who speaks without apology, who lives without fear of being alone. She comes back, and though her story may look the same from the outside, she knows everything has changed, because this time she's not returning to familiar patterns. She's not returning to people who only knew how to love her conditionally. She's returning on her terms, whole, healed, unshakable. She doesn't need to announce her transformation. She is the announcement. Every step, every boundary, every choice she makes now declares, I am not who I was, I am more. I am here, and I am not going back. So remember this, when you stop talking to a woman, you are not ending a conversation. You are unlocking her revolution. Do not be surprised when you return and find her gone, not because she left, but because she rose. And when a woman rises, she does not knock on the door you closed. She builds one of her own.